Today we're covering 5 tactics to avoid fatal landings. Here's the battle plan. We're going to start off with an introduction, and then we'll get into airman certification standards. We're going to cover runway incursions. This is basically something the FAA really wants us to cover these days. We'll get into the main 5 points of the discussion: the traffic pattern, airspeeds, descent rate, slow flight, and how to practice everything that we're talking about today. And then we'll talk about some next steps, and of course, we'll have a Q&A. If you have any questions at any point during the discussion, please, by all means, just go ahead and ask them. All right, so introduction. My name is Monty. I'm sure you guys have, heard of me. I am a former airborne ranger. I deployed once to Iraq, once to Afghanistan, and I've been wanting to be a pilot since I was born. I've always wanted to be a pilot. But growing up in Louisiana, we really didn't have the money for it, and so it was, straight into the Army after high school. After I got out of the Army, my wife actually hooked me up with a discovery flight up at Northway, up at Payne Field. And I found out that you could pay as you go. You didn't have to pay that full $10,000, $12,000 all at once. And so my flight instructor really helped me, figure out how to pay as I went, and then, basically fly, with very little money at the time. It was really nice. At the time, I was basically flying once a week, meeting with my instructor like once a week. And because of that, my skills weren't really progressing as much as I'd like. My landings weren't all that great when I first started out. I mean, that's how it goes. Student pilots generally don't have the greatest of landings. But porpoising, hard landings, bouncing, I did them all, basically. And so, after a while, I finally figured out how to perfect my landings, and I want to share that with you guys. It wasn't until my instructor and I really sat down and made a plan for tackling landing specifically that I started to get good at them. And I'm going to talk to you guys about how we did that today. So the first thing we did was make a flight plan. Instead of meeting once a week, we decided to meet more frequently because the more frequently you meet, the more frequently you practice, the better you're going to get. I also went out and got a desktop simulator, Flight Simulator X. I got a yoke and some rudder pedals. And I spent some solid time, some deliberate practice time on a home simulator, basically for an entire week. That's like all I did that week. And then I remember the next lesson that I had after spending just a solid week on the simulator, we went to Jefferson to get some pie. And, we get in the pattern, and I'm on short approach. And I'm telling you, when I got into ground effect, I could feel the air currents cushioning my plane. I could literally feel like the air, holding us up, and it was incredible, transitioning to slow flight and really feeling what the airplane was doing. So I was really excited. That was back when I was a student pilot, and now I'm a commercial pilot and ground instructor. So I want to share my lessons learned with you guys. So that's kind of an introduction of why we're doing this today, why we're covering this. Next, we're going to talk about runway incursions. So let's watch a short video first to kind of warm us up for the topic. Let's move up to 25 seconds. So airplane 1 is on short approach, and airplane 2 over here decides it's a good idea to get onto the runway and cross over. Now, of course, airplane 1 will have to go around so he doesn't collide with aircraft 2. And in this case, it wasn't a big deal, right? Nothing bad happened. Nobody traded paint. Basically, airplane 1 went around and it was fine. But if you can imagine a low visibility situation, or, if that other airplane came out a little later and the first airplane wasn't able to go around, we could have a serious problem and lead to, some serious loss of life. So that's why we care about runway incursion avoidance. So here's the objective for this short part of the discussion. You as a student should develop the knowledge of the elements related to proper incursion avoidance. And here are the 3 main points I want you to take from this section of the talk. Number 1, read back all your clearances. Number 2, only perform head-down activities when you are stopped. Basically, don't be texting and taxiing. And number 3, always, always, always use a current airport diagram when you are taxiing on the surface. Here are the elements of this discussion. We're going to talk about taxiing, appropriate cockpit activities, steering, maneuvering, maintaining taxiway, runway position, and situational awareness, hold lines, landing and rollout, controlled versus uncontrolled airports, and night operations. And again, if you have any questions at all, just ask them. So when we are taxiing, And in general, when we're flying an aircraft, we must maintain good situational awareness. We want to keep our head on a swivel. So don't be looking down, don't be texting, don't be messing with the radios, don't be reconfiguring the aircraft. You have one job when you are taxiing on the surface, and that is to keep your eyes up and taxi the aircraft to your destination. Okay. Now, some common distractions that we have while we're taxiing will include things like talking to ATC or running through checklists or creating flight plans, messing with the PFD, the MFD. We must avoid these distractions if we are to have a safe flight. If we're the first thing we're doing and taxiing out to the runway and you're not even paying attention to what's going on outside, you're going to have a bad day. So focus, avoid distractions while we're taxiing. Now, when we first go out to the aircraft, we're going to do a proper pre-flight according to the FAA or to the manufacturer, right? We're going to use a checklist. We're going to go around the plane and make sure that the plane is airworthy. Now, we always use a checklist for this. And then we use a checklist for our before engine start. And we use a safety brief checklist for our passengers. Basically, anytime we can reduce our mental workload using a checklist and do everything we need to do before we start moving the aircraft, that's a good thing, right? Now, part of our passenger briefing is we use our safety checklist, safety, I can spell. T stands for talking when we are briefing our passengers. And this is kind of different than the airlines. In the general aviation world, when we get to this part of the safety brief, we tell our passengers, you are not a passenger today, you are part of the crew, and you're going to be watching your sector. I need you to scan and then keep in mind that we are going to maintain a sterile cockpit and only talk about things that are pertinent to the flight while we are in motion. So if we are taxiing, if we are flying, basically keep a sterile cockpit, don't talk, keep your eyes out, keep your head on a swivel. Make sense? If it doesn't make sense, just shout out. I assume you guys aren't going to answer. All right. And then finally, plan, review, and brief. Anytime you're going out to fly, you want to have a solid plan for what you're going to be doing. That includes your departure. So we go out to the plane. We should have an idea of what ATC is going to tell us to do. At Payne, there are 2 runways, so you kind of have 2 routes you can go from your parking lot, essentially. So have a mental plan for how you're going to do that. When you get a briefing, review it and make sure you understand it and it all makes sense, and then brief it. If you're flying with a co-pilot or a passenger, even if you're flying alone, it's a good idea to self-brief the route and then comply with the instructions. Excuse me. Now, a lot of people think early on in their training, they think that the yoke is like a car steering wheel, that if you turn the yoke left or right, it'll turn the airplane left or right. Now, remember that the airplane is a 3-dimensional vehicle, and the yoke actually commands the ailerons and the elevators. So this is our little airplane here. On the ground, we are mostly yawing around the taxiway. So we're going to use our rudder pedals to taxi. We're only going to use our ailerons to help keep our wing from being flipped over by the wind. So steering is accomplished primarily by rudder pedals as we steer on the ground. Now, your position. You should be aware of where you are on the taxiway. And we're going to use a couple of different resources to ensure we are aware of where we are. First of all, we're going to use our old eyeballs and look at the signs around us to make sure we are following the correct route. So remember, black square, you are there. If you see a black square with yellow letters or numbers, that's your position on the field. If you see a yellow square with black letters or numbers, that's telling you to go somewhere else. That's a sign saying, hey, this intersection here. We're going to use that in addition to our airport diagram. And some aircraft now have the ability to track your position on the taxiway using the MFD, or the multifunction display screen. Really cool, awesome way to maintain situational awareness, but don't rely on it, right? Don't assume that it's correct. Use multiple sources of information to confirm your position on the airfield. So use all your resources. Bam. Now, as we're taxiing around, when we are on the central ramp, for example, and you see you taxi up to a line on the ground that looks like this. This is telling you that you need to get additional clearance to pass this mark. This will be on the ground. We're following a line this way. When we come up to this, we want to stop. We want to talk to ground and get permission to pass over. Once we have permission, they'll say something like Cessna 2438 Echo, taxi to the runway via Alpha Juliet Delta. You confirm, read back Alpha Juliet Delta 34 left, and then you are cleared to pass over this line. Similarly, you're going to have 2 sets of solid and 2 sets of dashed lines when you come up to a runway. This is a runway hold marking. And again, you can't pass this without additional clearance from the tower. Here you need ground, and over here you need tower. And we'll talk about the differences here in a second. You're going to need tower to clear you onto the runway to go past this. Now, if you're coming back from a flight and you're on the soft side or the dash side, you are good to clear. You're clear to taxi over without additional clearance. Same here. You're clear to taxi past this without additional permission from the tower or ground. But if you see the hard side first, you got to stop, get permission, and then go. And always read back. Always verify and read back your instructions. Now let's talk about the landing rollout. As you're coming to land, there are 3 main types of airports we're going to worry about now. There's a single runway. There's two parallel runways. You can see this guy here and here. And then you've got 2 intersecting runways, right? Now, anytime you go flying, one of the items that you need to be aware of is the distance and width of your destination runway. Do you have enough runway to land at your destination? Of course, in our general aviation aircraft, the answer is almost always yes, but don't take it for granted. Sometimes you don't have enough runway to land. So verify, this runway here is 6,000 feet. Payne's got a 9,000 foot runway, and what is this? Olympia, 4,000 on one, 5,000 on the other. So we probably have enough distance to land. Now, when we land on the runway, there is one thing you need to be aware of. There's one thing you need to be doing. You have one job, right? Land the plane. Come to a full stop. Don't do anything else. Don't be messing with flaps, landing gear, lights, radio frequencies, talking on the radio. Don't do any of that. You touch down, apply your brakes, come to a full stop, get off of the runway, get onto the taxiway, stop the aircraft. Then use your checklist to clean it up and do what you got to do. A lot of pilots, well, not a lot, pilots have gotten in trouble in the past trying to do all their, flaps and landing gear and everything while they're on the landing rollout, and they forget to fly the plane and then scoot off the runway and, damage something. Don't do that. Don't be that guy. Focus on landing the plane. Do the right thing. Get off the runway, onto the taxiway, full stop, then pull out your checklist and do what you got to do. Then, when you are ready, once everything is cleaned up, then switch to ground frequency or whoever you need to talk to. On parallel runways, be aware that if you land on one runway and try to taxi past another runway, you can't do that. You need additional permission. Let's pretend this runway is right next to the other runway, and you've got one taxiway here. You're going to have that hold short marking, right? You're going to be fine to clear this way, but you can't go past this one. So you're going to be stuck right here. Remember, you have to get permission to get onto a runway. Even if you just got off one, you got to make sure you get that additional permission to pass it or to depart again. Now, the third one, this is the one that can get you into some trouble. I'm going to draw it over here. Now, this third runway, if they have land and hold short operations, it's going to complicate things. And I think we've talked about it before, but essentially what they want you to do, instead of using the entire runway, they want you to land and then stop before crossing over to the next runway. And now our 5,000 foot runway has gone from 5,000 to 2,500 feet, roughly. Again, back of the envelope calculation. Now you've cut your runway in half, and you have to stop before you pass the other runway because another airplane might be on their landing roll, right? So that's not fun. Now, remember, as a pilot in command, you always have the ability to say the magic word, unable. We are unable to land and hold short. Roger. And they can't force you to do it. They can say, Roger, go around, or Roger, clear to land full length, or whatever. Basically, it comes up to you. It comes down to you whether you are comfortable landing in this half runway now. I probably wouldn't do it, even though I'm a commercial pilot. I don't like the idea of land and hold short operations. But a more experienced pilot might be okay with it. You have to make that decision for yourself. Remember, as a student pilot, you are not authorized to accept a land and hold short clearance. So yeah, there's a landing roll up. Remember, you have one job: land the plane, come to a full stop. Once you are clear, you cannot get back onto the runway without additional clearance, and you can't pass a parallel runway without additional clearance. And intersecting runways may have you land and hold short, which means land and stop before you cross the other runway. Okay, bam. Now let's talk about controlled versus non-controlled, or towered versus non-towered airfields. Payne Field is a towered field most of the time. That means that there is an operating control tower that controls the runways and the airspace around the airfield. They also have ground control, which controls the taxiways on the surface. So anytime you are moving from the ramp to the runway, you must be in contact with Payne ground. And you're going to look here on the airport diagram for that frequency. Payne ground is 121.8. So you talk to them, you request clearance to depart. You're going to get instructions, understand them, use your airport diagram, verify you understand your route, read it back, go to the appropriate runway, and then switch over to Payne Tower. And depending on which runway you're on, you got to use the right frequency. And then again, when you are given a clearance, read it back exactly as they said it. So Payne Tower, Cessna 38 Echo, holding short, runway 34 left, Alpha 10. They're going to say Cessna 38 Echo, runway 34 left, cleared for takeoff. Now, takeoff, that word is very special. We only say that word when we've received a clearance to depart, right? When they have said the words cleared for takeoff, that is when you can, that's when you use that phrase. Don't ever say, hey, we'd like to take off now. And the reason for that is there have been instances in the past where someone will say the word takeoff, even though they weren't cleared for takeoff, get on the runway, and then trade paint with another aircraft. Not good. So there are certain phrases we only say when we are cleared for them. And that is one of them, cleared for takeoff. Now, at a non-towered airfield, we're kind of on our own. It's kind of the Wild West. We basically self-announce on the common traffic advisory frequency. We advise other pilots in the area. We're not talking to a tower here. We're talking to other pilots. And we're going to tell them, hey, we're 10 miles to the east. We're going to land on runway 27. And then the other pilots will be like, cool, I'm on the downwind for runway 27. And the other pilot's like, cool, I'm on final for 27. Basically, everybody's self-reporting. Now, that's fine when you're in the air. But once you get on the ground, again, there's nobody to talk to. So get off the runway, get onto the taxiway, and then basically keep your head on a swivel, maintain good situational awareness, be aware of where the parking area is. This is part of your pre-flight briefing. You should know where you're going. And then once you get there, what are you going to do? It happens to be that at Jefferson, you're supposed to move in a counterclockwise manner around the taxiways. And nobody's going to tell you that. There's nobody there to tell you that. There's no ground control. I mean, maybe another pilot might be like, hey, dude, you're going the wrong direction. Actually, that happened to me once. I landed at a new airfield. I was just got my private pilot. I landed and I was like, I have no idea where to go for transient parking. And this dude pulled up in his pickup. He's like, hey, you a new pilot? I was like, yes, I am. He's like, cool. Follow me. I was like, thanks, man. I appreciate it. It was really cool. I've noticed that at least up here in Washington, the general aviation community is very friendly, very helpful. So if you ever are unclear, don't be afraid to ask somebody at the airport. Okay, let's talk about night operations. Night operations present some additional challenges because we have reduced visibility. So keep in mind that before you go fly at night, you want to not stare at white lights, not stare at bright lights before you get to the airfield. Bring a red light for your checklists and anything inside the cockpit. And then be aware of the different lights at the airport. So these blue lights here are taxiway edge lights. Also, going back to lights, you want to not blind other pilots. You want to be mindful of when you turn your lights on. So anytime the engine is running, you have to have your rotating beacon on. Anytime you are in motion, it's a good idea to have your landing and taxi lights on and your navigation lights, the green, red, and white lights. The runway is going to have white lights. So if you are on the runway, if you received a line up and wait clearance from the tower, you want to line up off center, not on directly on the center line, so that another pilot may distinguish you from the runway. Does that make sense? Basically, offset yourself from the runway or from the center line so that they can tell that you are an airplane and not just part of the surface. So here's your rotating beacon. That's got to be on. Your navigation light, that green light right there, needs to be on. You don't want to have your strobes on when you're taxiing. The only time you turn your strobes on are when you are on a runway, and that's so you don't blind other pilots who might be taxiing around. So once you get onto the runway, here actually is a good spot right here. You don't want to be right here, center on the center line, because it might be difficult to see you. So just offset a little bit so a landing pilot can be like, oh shoot, that's an airplane on the runway there. And then they can go around. But again, if you're getting onto the runway, strobe lights on so that you are visible and flashing. So crossing the runway, departing, or landing, have your strobe lights on. I think that about covers it. Yeah. Okay. So one of the biggest safety concerns in aviation is the surface movement accident. By focusing resources to attack this problem head on, the FAA hopes to reduce and eventually eliminate surface movement accidents. This is a big thing. The FAA is really pushing for this, for us not to have surface collisions and runway incursions. Remember the 3 things I want you to take away from this segment. Read back all your clearances. Confirm what the tower is telling you. Understand it, write it down, and then read it back so that they know that you know what you're doing, right? Number 2, only perform head-down activities when stopped. Anytime we're taxiing, don't be texting, don't be messing with radios, don't be messing with your map. Stop the plane, do what you got to do, and then move. And then number 3, always use a current airport diagram. Have a map so that you are maneuvering correctly on the airfield. Bam. Awesome. All right, so that covers runway incursion avoidance. Now, let's move on to the traffic pattern. So these are the 5 things that I recommend for nailing your landings. This is the meat and potatoes of the discussion. Number 1, traffic pattern. Nail your airspeeds. Nail your descent rate. Practice slow flight, and then do deliberate, well thought out practice. So let's get into it. Excuse me. So the traffic pattern. The student should develop knowledge of the elements related to the proper procedures, rules, and elements of the traffic pattern at both the controlled and uncontrolled field. The student will be able to demonstrate this knowledge as required in the ACS or PTS. The main points from this one, we're going to talk about how to get into the pattern, our communication, and orientation. Now, so those are the big 3. The main elements we're going to talk about are the pattern, controlled versus uncontrolled, orientation to the runway, maintaining proper spacing, wind shear, and wake turbulence. Now, the pattern is something you're going to have to see basically every time you depart and every time you land. It's always going to be part of your flight, essentially. And it's standardized so that everybody knows what they're doing and we all do the same thing the same way. It's basically a race track shape around the runway. And most of the time, the standard turns are to the left. So left turns. If you ever see RP on a chart or a chart supplement, that means right pattern, and we're making right turns. But for today, we're just going to focus on left pattern. The main the legs of the traffic pattern are the departure leg, crosswind, downwind, base, and final. Okay. Obviously, we depart on the departure end. We're going to be departing into the wind, and we're going to be landing into the wind because that's going to reduce our ground speed. At 700 feet above the surface, when we climb out, we're going to make our turn to crosswind. So 700 feet above the surface. When we're 1,000 feet, we're going to continue climbing in crosswind. When we're 1,000 feet, we're going to turn to downwind. So 700 feet, turn to crosswind. 1,000 feet, turn downwind. Right? That's the standard. Now, on the downwind, you want to be you don't want to be in full afterburner in your Cessna 172 on the downwind. You want to be at a comfortable speed, something like 90 knots. That's really the best, I found the best speed to be at on downwind. But there's no legal requirement. In the 172, we have specific speeds we're going to use, and we're going to talk about those later. So on the downwind, once you're abeam the numbers, this is when you're going to start running through your landing sequence. We're going to descend from this point again to 700 feet, and then we're going to turn base. So 700 feet crosswind, 700 feet base, and then the downwind is 1,000. And then we're going to turn final and coming in for a landing. Now, that's great if you are starting off on the runway, but what happens if you're coming from a different runway or different airfield? Well, you're going to enter, the standard entry is this 45-degree angle to the downwind leg. So 45 degrees here. And we call that the 45. So on the radios, we'll be like, Payne Tower or Jefferson traffic says a 3 that goes on the 45 for runway 27. Okay. Now, controlled versus uncontrolled, or towered versus non-towered fields. At a towered airfield, you're going to be in contact with the tower, obviously, and they're going to tell you how to get into the field. So something like 10 miles out, we're going to call them up and say, Payne Tower, Cessna 243 at Echo, to land with information Bravo. And that's just the weather. We'll deal with that later. So 10 miles out, you're going to let them know, hey, I'm coming in. I would like to land. And they'll say something like, Roger, enter on the 45 for left downwind, runway 34. There, bam, right? And so you will repeat back. Remember, always repeat back your clearances. Enter on the left downwind, or on the 45 for left downwind for runway 34, Cessna 3 Echo. And you'll enter on the left downwind and then make standard patterns. Remember, 700 feet. Once we are at 700 feet, we're going to turn base and then final. That's great. Tower tells us what to do. Love it. They might tell you enter on the base, or they might tell you enter straight in, or enter on the downwind, whatever. They're going to tell you how to do it. And it's super easy. You just follow their instructions and do the right thing. Now, what happens if you're at an uncontrolled airfield? Well, same thing. 10 miles out, we're going to self-announce. Jefferson traffic sets a 3 at Echo is 10 miles out to land for runway 27. And then you're going to enter on that 45. And you're going to keep making radio calls as you do it. Excuse me. So on the 45, we'll say Jefferson traffic sets a 3 at Echoes on the 45 for left downwind, runway 27. And then on base, or when we're on final, Jefferson traffic says the 3 Echo is on left downwind, runway 27, Jefferson traffic. And we always sandwich our radio calls with the airfield at non-controlled or non-towered fields. Turning base, Jefferson traffic says the 3 Echo, turning left base, runway 27. And then final, don't say left final, you'll get made fun of. Jefferson traffic says the 3 Echo is on final, runway 27. Right? So that covers it, right? I think. So maintaining proper spacing. Now, we want to give ourselves enough space. About a mile is a good space here between you and the runway. Honestly, the way I remember this, if we're looking at the runway here, I'm looking at my strut. This is my wing. I'm looking out like off my left wing. I want the runway off my left strut at 1,000 feet above the field. And you're going to learn this in your specific aircraft. But basically, find visual reference points in your plane that will help you maintain good spacing. But that's the one for me, halfway up the strut at 1,000 feet. Now, there might be other aircraft in the pattern as well, and you want to be aware of that. You don't want to get too close to another airplane because you might trade paint and have a rough day. So if you hear another aircraft in the pattern, maybe do a 360 before entering on the 45. The tower might actually have you do a right 360 in the pattern for spacing. Actually, it might be It would be the second guy. Basically, they might say something like, hey, make a right 360 for spacing, report when you're back on downwind. And all you're going to do is make a right turn for a minute and come back onto downwind. Now, let's see. About here, you want to be at least a quarter of a mile, maybe half mile out. This 45-degree angle is a good reference point as well. Yeah, cool. Now let's talk about wind shear and wake turbulence. First of all, what is wind shear? Wind shear is a sudden change of direction and velocity of the wind. It's not fun. And sometimes you can experience this in a strong downdraft. If you experience a downdraft like this, you'll first experience a very intense headwind. Your performance will increase. And then as you penetrate the downdraft, it'll shear to a vertical or tailwind. And your performance is going to drop. And you're going to get pulled up and then all of a sudden drop down like this. Not fun. The way we avoid the best thing to do is avoid them. But the way we avoid them is by getting a good weather brief and not flying when we have hazardous weather. You really want to avoid this, right? Now, wake turbulence is something that you're going to have to be aware of. Wake turbulence is generated by an aircraft when it is generating lift. So when the aircraft is departing, you're going to see wake turbulence generating, and then when it lands, it should end once the aircraft has got all three landing gear on the ground. All right. We always want to avoid flying in another aircraft's wake turbulence. If you're flying behind a heavy aircraft, give it like 3 minutes before you depart, before you land, just to let it dissipate. If you have to land immediately after another heavy aircraft, try to land beyond their touchdown point or try to take off before their departure point. But remember, you're not going to outclimb a a 747. You're in a Cessna 172. So be mindful of the aircraft wake turbulence. Really, the best thing to do is give it time. So some common errors with the traffic pattern is poor altitude and or poor airspeed, or inability to maintain proper altitude or airspeed. So when you are flying the pattern, nail that 1,000 feet. Nail your airspeed, 95 knots, 85 knots, whatever it is. Improper correction for wind drift. As we are flying, we'll have our nose pointed parallel with the runway. But if there is a crosswind, it's going to blow us off course. Our airplane's basically in a giant air ocean. And so any wind is going to blow us off course. So we might have to crab into the wind like this. So our airplane will fly this way, the wind will blow us this way, and our path will be what we want. So proper correction for wind drift. Nail that. Inadequate spacing, making sure you're using your visual reference points to keep yourself spaced correctly with the runway and other aircraft. And then failure to comply with ATC regulations or common procedures. So study your radio call, study the airport you're going to, and do the right thing. Bam. So number 1, nail your traffic pattern. If you can nail your traffic pattern, you're going to set yourself up for an excellent landing. If you can nail that turn to final, that's really going to set you up for a good landing. Number 2, airspeeds. Let's talk about airspeed versus ground speed. Now, airspeed is right off the airspeed indicator, and it tells you how fast you're moving through the medium of air, through the fluid of air. It doesn't really have anything to do with your ground speed. You could be going 95 knots, but if you've got a direct headwind of 85 knots, you're going to be going like 10 knots on the ground, right? So your airplane might be telling you, man, we are trucking, but your ground speed could be completely different from what you're actually, what your airspeed indicator is showing you. That's why we always want to land into the wind, because the slower ground speed we can get while maintaining airspeed, the better we are, the easier it's going to be for us to land and slow down. Let's talk about the airspeed indicator. Now, the airspeed indicator takes static air and ram air from the pitot tube and it compares them. Basically, it's saying, all right, this is what the outside air feels like, and this is what the airspeed or the ram air feels like. And it tells you, all right, we're definitely, this is what we're flying, or this is the speed that we're going through this pocket of air, right? And we'll talk about the VSI and the altimeter later. Now, we want to get really, really good at nailing our airspeeds. And we do that by pitch, power, and trim. We use our yoke or our stick and set our nose where we want it. We set our power for whatever power setting we want. And using our pitch, we can actually select an airspeed. Once we have everything settled out, we're going to use our trim wheel to basically trim off control pressure so that you can take your hand off the yoke and the airplane will stay at the airspeed and configuration that you want it at. That trim tab is huge. Now, your V speeds are important. Your V speeds are common velocities that you want to be aware of. Things like VFE, your maximum flap extended speed. You don't want to be dropping flaps when you're faster than the speed because you can damage the aircraft. Your glide speed, VG. You want to be aware of what your best glide speed is. Best rate of climb, best angle of climb, that kind of stuff. So go study your aircraft's V speeds and then go out to the airfield or go out, up flying and practice trimming your aircraft for those speeds. When you get good at nailing the speed, the specific speed you want, you're going to be in good shape for nailing your landings. Now let's talk about the pattern again. When we are in downwind, you want to be slow-ish. You don't want to be like super slow. You don't want to be like at slow speed, but you don't want to be, again, in full afterburner because the more time you have to think and run through checklists on the downwind, the better off you're going to be. You're just going to have more time to think. It's good. When we are abeam in the Cessna 172, we're going to change our pitch, power, trim, and flaps for 85 knots. That's our downwind speed once we're abeam the numbers. And we're going to drop down to 700 feet. Once we are at 700 feet and 45 degrees away from the runway, we're going to turn to final and drop another 20 degrees of flaps. And we're going to pitch, power, and trim for 75 knots. And then again, we're going to turn final once we're aligned with the runway. And you want to trim for 65 knots. And I land with 20, but you can land with 30 degrees of flaps. And I'm telling you, nail this. If you can nail 65 knots, 30 degrees of flaps, power and trim set, so you can take your hands off the yoke and just let the airplane glide in, you're going to be set. This is how you set up for a beautiful landing. Pitch, power, trim, nail your airspeeds. All right. So you should be coming in 65 knots, 30 degrees of flaps. That is how you set up for a smooth landing. Now, so we've talked about the pattern, airspeeds. Let's talk about our descent rate now. Now, we gauge our descent rate using our vertical speed indicator. And that, again, is part of the pedostatic system. And it's all about air pressure. The vertical speed indicator and the altimeter both take static air and they give you an indication of your altitude or your vertical speed. And this is how they work. They take in static air. The altimeter, you actually set the altimeter to say, hey, this right here, this is what sea level pressure is. And you'll get it, using some altimeter setting. You tell the altimeter, this is what sea level feels like. And then it takes static air from around the airplane and pumps it into, or not pumps, but it takes it into this chamber. And the difference of pressure will expand or contract this little thing of aneroid wafers. And it'll turn these gears and give you an indication of your altitude. It's pretty neat. I think it's awesome. I have a student who tells me it's like 18th century technology, but I think it's so cool. So that's how the altimeter works. And some things about the altimeter, you have to have the right altimeter setting, because if you don't, you're going to be thinking, all right, sweet, I'm at 1,000 feet, but you're really not. If your altimeter is not set correctly, you're going to be reading the wrong altitude. Some things to keep in mind. If you don't have the altimeter set correctly and you go from an area of high pressure to low pressure, from high to low, look out below. Again, if you don't correct your altimeter setting and you're going from high to low pressure, you are going to crash because you're going to think you are higher than you actually are. So high to low, look out below. On the flip side is true. If you're going from a low pressure to a high pressure without fixing your altimeter, without changing the altimeter setting, low to high, clear the sky. You're going to think you are at one altitude. You're actually going to be up here higher. Okay. So the altimeter, make sure it's set correctly. It's going to put you at 1,000 feet where you need to be, right? Now the VSI is very similar, except here you're not telling it what the pressure is. There are two chambers that can expand and contract. There's a calibrated leak, and it takes in static pressure into this diaphragm. As the pressure changes in here, it'll expand or contract, and it'll push in or suck, or push out or suck in air into this chamber. Now, if the two are in balance, you're going to get an indication of 0 feet per minute climb or descent. But if there is a pressure differential, they're going to turn these gears because of the pressure differential here. And it's going to tell you, hey, you're climbing at 100 feet per minute, or you're descending at 300 feet per minute, or whatever. I think it's really cool. And again, once the air in both of these, if the air pressure equalizes, it'll go back to 0, an indication of 0 feet per minute rate of descent or climb. I think it's super cool. So why do we care? Because when you're on final, you need to have this sight picture. You want the runway basically, just a couple inches off the dash, and you want to have 500 foot per minute rate of descent at 65 knots, pitch, power, trim, set. If you can nail your airspeed, 65, 30 degrees of flaps, and your vertical speed at 500 feet per minute, you are setting yourself up for a beautiful landing. I'm telling you. Okay. So talked about nailing the pattern. We talked about nailing our airspeeds. We talked about nailing our descent rate. Finally, we're going to get to slow flight. Now, everybody thinks, oh, we're like the space shuttle. We're going to flare right over the runway. And they just haul back on the stick. Oh, man. I'm telling you, that's one way to scare your flight instructor. We don't flare. We transition to land. We transition to slow flight right over the runway. And the way we do that, and the way we practice it, we go up to altitude and we actually practice transitioning from regular flight, cruise flight. We pull the power, set our pitch, drop full flaps, 30 degrees of flaps, and we trim it off and we add power back until we are actually below our glide speed. So 55 knots in the Cessna. If we're approaching at 65 knots to land, we're going to be here transitioning to slow flight at 55 knots, right? So we're going to be up at altitude, pitch, power, trim, flaps, trim, big one, and just practice hanging out slow. You're going to be behind the power curve. You're going to feel your controls are super mushy, unresponsive as heck. And I want you to practice turning at altitude. Really gentle turns because you don't want to stall the plane because you are slow. And you're just going to practice, being slow. Once you have that, once you've gotten that practice down at altitude, practice recovering, going back to cruise flight, then I want you to go and practice right over the runway and practice transitioning to slow flight right over the runway. Don't land, but basically just practice transitioning to slow flight right over the runway and then bugging out and going around. This is the biggest one right here. I feel like I don't have as much of emphasis as I should have. Transitioning to slow flight right over the runway is the way to land the plane. That's it. Like, that's something I tell, like, whenever I go flying with, people who are working on their private, that's the last thing I say before I shut up and let them do it. Transition to slow flight. That's all we're doing. You're going to be right over the runway, just holding it off and basically just practicing slow flight right over the runway. And then when you're ready, kill the power all the way, keep it in slow flight, and just let the plane settle right under the runway. I'm telling you, this is the way to do it. Slow flight. Okay. Bam. Finally, this is how we practice. We're going to break everything down and attack each element of the process so that we can, nail our landings. First of all, the pattern. We're going to go up to altitude and practice the rectangular course. Instead of going to the airfield and, changing altitudes and airspeeds, we're just going to focus on flying a rectangle over a field. And I want you to get really good at dealing with wind drift, basically getting your visual references down, making sure your turns are nice and smooth. And we're just going to do this at 1,000 feet, 1,000 feet the entire time. And don't worry about changing altitudes or airspeeds. Just nail that. Then we're going to worry about airspeeds. We're going to go up to altitude, and I want you to go from 119 knots, trim, pitch power trim, set it at 19, take your hands off the controls. Good. Now we're going to reconfigure, pull power, go to 90 knots, pitch power trim, nail 90 knots, trim it off, take your hands off, and you should be able to stay at 90 knots. All right, good. Now we're going to switch it up, and we're going to go to 75 knots. Basically just practice transitioning between different airspeeds and trimming it off so that you can take your hands off and nail whatever airspeed you want. Then we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it for vertical speed. And we'll start with the climb. So at 90 knots, I want you to climb at a rate of 500 feet per minute. So whatever it takes, pitch, power, trim it off. And we want that VSI to go from 0 to 500 feet per minute. Nail that rate of climb, hands off. Everything should stabilize. Everything should be good. You should not have to touch anything. Good. Now let's go back to 0. Pitch, power, trim, set at 0 feet per minute. Great. Now transition to 500 feet per minute rate of descent. Pull your power, set your pitch, power, and trim. You should be able to take your hands off the controls and maintain 500 feet per minute rate of descent. This is how we get good. I'm telling you. Nail your vertical speeds. And then, so once you get good at that, then do both of these at the same time. I want a 90 knot descent at 560 feet per minute, whatever, and do both of these at the same time. Then at altitude, transition in and out of slow flight. This is different from our airspeeds because now we're going to changing flaps and we're going to be really, really slow, 55 knots, just above the stall horn, and practice turning and maintaining course in slow flight. Get really, really good at slow flight. And then go do it right over the runway with your instructor, right? Don't do this on your own until you're good. Go practice with an instructor and practice slow flight like 10 to 20 feet off the ground. Practice slow flight right over the runway and then recover and then go around and do it again. You do this like 3 or 4 times. I'm telling you, you're going to be like, oh, I could land this in my sleep. It's going to feel great. The other thing you should do, go watch your instructor. Take a break every once in a while you're flying. You're going to be overloaded. You're like, hey, do you mind if I watch you do a pattern? Take your hands off the controls, let the flight instructor do their loop, watch how they land, and then you can emulate them. And then deliberate practice on the simulator. Now, this doesn't mean go play on a simulator. This is worded this way for a reason. Deliberate practice. I want you to treat your simulator as though you were flying a real airplane. Don't go up and do barrel rolls over the runway. I want you to practice good habits so that when you get to the runway or when you get to the airfield and you go to your check ride, the examiner's like, you fly like somebody with twice as many hours. That's exactly what my examiner told me on my last check ride. He's like, you fly like somebody with like 600 hours. It was ridiculous. And the way I got to be so comfortable flying a plane is by deliberate practice on a simulator. And then let's talk about the curve of forgetting. Real quick, let me erase everything on the slide. Erase all link. Still recording. Good. The curve of forgetting looks like this. This is time. And this is, I guess, knowledge or whatever. Let's say you go out, you come to me and we do a ground session. We go learn something. You learn something, you know something. And then if you don't practice it, you're going to slowly forget it over time. All right. And this is time. Now, if you come back, let's say this is day 1, this is day 5. If you come back on day 2 and we explore it again, you're going to remember some more and you're going to learn something new and your curve of forgetting is going to reset and it's going to keep going. If you come back on day 3, you're going to learn some more and your curve of forgetting is going to reset again. So you want to keep coming back, spaced repetition, deliberate practice. You want to keep revisiting knowledge so that it stays in your brain. You want to put it here, it's in short-term memory. You want to put it into long-term memory by revisiting and practicing things deliberately and continuously over time. So that's a big one. So spaced repetition, consistent, deliberate practice is how you do it. Bam. Cool. There we go. All right. So now the training's complete. I've basically talked to you for 50 minutes. I hope you've learned a lot from this discussion. Now you've got 2 options. Number 1, you can continue to learn flying on your own. Or number two, you can work with an expert, a commercial pilot, authorized ground instructor. This is how it works. First of all, in either case, I want you to go to Emerald's Garden Aviation and I want you to get my free ebook. This is 7 free tools that are going to help you maximize your training. There are 7 things that you can use without paying a dime that's going to help you get some good training. Now, when you're ready, if you want to work with me, I want you to go up here to plans and pricing. And there are 2 options here. If you want to work with me 3 days a week and basically have like a flight lead, giving you daily accountability, checking in with you every day, making sure you are practicing and keeping up on your training, this is the way to go. You can go, it's $299 a week, and we're basically going to meet 3 days a week, and I'm going to just be constantly talking to you about aviation. If that doesn't work for you, that's cool. We've got the once a week. We'll meet once a week. And then again, I will be like your personal trainer for aviation. I'll talk to you, I text you every day just to make sure you're keeping up on your training. And then we'll meet up once a week and I'll have personalized lessons for you. If that doesn't work for you, totally understand. You can always go up here to more and go to book online. If you just want like one-off, like on-demand ground instruction, go to book now. It's $75 an hour. Just pick a time slot that works for you, and I'll make sure to get you some good training. I always want to make sure that you guys are getting way more information than you're paid for. If you ever work with me, I want you to be like, man, I can't believe I got all this for such a small amount. If you don't want to do one-on-one ground instruction, that's fine too. We do have a shop here. If you go to more, click on shop. I've written a couple of books, Skyhawk Pilot. This is a step-by-step guide to getting your wings. Really proud of that one. Staying grounded is if you want to be like me and become a ground instructor, this is the way to go. Both of these, if you go to Amazon, you click on buy, you can get the paperback or the Amazon Kindle. Or if you want to just get the PDF ebook, you can also just scroll down to the bottom of the page. And there's also some cool stuff there. Bam. So that is that. If you guys are interested, I'll put a link in the Discord. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put that on in the description as well. All right. Bam. We still got 10 minutes. I'm here for you to answer any questions you might have. You cannot bore me. I love talking about aviation. So what do you guys think? Any feedback from me? Any thoughts at all? Send it. And while you guys think of your questions, I'll be doodling.
Thank you for the lesson, Monty. Definitely got a lot of information added today. I was just curious about, I guess, what the current plan is as far as getting people ready for their, I guess, written exam. So, like how many of these would you expect someone to come to before they would be ready to do that?
Yeah, great question. So the Husky Flying Club, I've partnered with the Husky Flying Club to give you guys a free ground thing. I'll put the link in the Discord as well. Basically, it comes down to when you're ready, which is kind of neat because if you know everything you need to know, like next week, I'll sign you off to take the exam. The best way to go about it is to read the FAA books. And again, that's in the 7 free resources book that I put out there. Read the Airplane Flying Handbook, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and the FAR AIM, and then quiz yourself on the quiz website that I have on that book as well. When you are scoring like 90 to 100% consistently, then I'll sign you off. So it really comes down to how aggressive you want to be. Right? I know that's not like a super easy answer. It just comes down to like how aggressive you want to be in your studies.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you have any tips on, I guess, cycling through the instruments and gauges in the cockpit when you're doing your like descents and ascents? Just because I know when I'm doing those, I often forget to like either like pay attention to where those are, or I'm just like so focused on making sure that I'm going up that I forget about what the instruments are doing.
Yeah, excellent question. One second, I'm gonna draw a thing. So first of all, let me just make sure that my drawings here make sense. Right. Okay, so if this is your attitude indicator, you should have your airspeed indicator, airspeed altimeter, VSI, heading indicator, and the turn coordinator. Basically, what you should be doing is most of your time should be spent looking outside the aircraft. 90% of your time in the VFR world should be up and out, and then double checking on inside. So looking at the horizon, if you're looking off your wingtip, left wingtip and right wingtip should have about the same amount of clearance between it and the horizon. And then 10% of your time should be looking inside, double checking your instruments. Now, your instrument scan, there are several different ways to go about it. I personally like the flower, I guess, or the starburst. You start out at the attitude indicator, and you go out to each instrument like this, and go back to the attitude indicator. Right. So you start here, come out to turn coordinator, and then back, and then down to the heading indicator and back. This is basically like your little simulator, like your little airplane, and it tells you, the big picture of what your airplane is doing. Are you level with the horizon? Are you banking? Are you nose high, nose low? Most of your information, this is a really good broad picture to look at, and then double check with everything else. That's kind of how I do it. I've heard of other methods where you scan like this. Not my favorite. I personally like imagining I'm flying this little airplane and then confirming with everything else. That makes sense? And we'll talk more about that when we get to the when we talk about instruments.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Where's this guy?
Thank you for the lesson today, Monty.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
Would you also know any scholarship opportunities like in the area as far as funding flight lessons? Just because starting to run out, and that's like the thing I want to avoid is that whole that knowledge thing you were just explaining. If you
Yeah.
take too much time away, you'll forget.
Yeah, definitely. So there's the AOPA. If you go to the AOP website, they have scholarships there. The WPA, the Washington Pilots, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association is the first one. The WPA, or Washington Pilots Association, is the second. I actually got this scholarship when I first started training, so definitely worth it. Basically, they have you write an essay and fill out some, a questionnaire, and they decide, who to give it to. They're really cool. And if you have the opportunity, or if you have the desire, you can also come to the WPA meetings. We meet once a month, for a dinner and like some cool training. So that's the other one I would recommend. And then I can look into other scholarships. I don't know off the top of my head of any other ones, but I'm sure they're out there.
When would the next meeting be for the WPA?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I just got an email. I think it's the first Friday in February, if I'm not mistaken. I think so. Yes, the first Friday in February. Yeah, and I can even put that out in the Discord if anybody wants to come. It's usually pretty cheap, like $20 a person for dinner. And depending on where they do it, they have like a banquet, or it's catered by whoever. It's pretty cool. And then you get to hang out with other pilots and make some cool connections.
That sounds dope. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Totally. Bam. Thanks for watching. All right. If there's anybody else here, thanks for sticking around. I will see you guys next week.